On a quiet Monday morning in November 2021, Jack Dorsey pressed send on a single tweet and walked away from the company that had defined his life. Twitter CEO, founder, billionaire, in control of the global conversation, and then, suddenly, gone. No scandal, no boardroom coup, just a strangely calm resignation letter and a promise that it's finally time for me to leave. But to understand why the man who built Twitter abandoned it at the height of its power, we have to go back to a tiny office in San Francisco and a friendship he burned to the ground. In 2005, the center of Jack's world wasn't Twitter. It was a struggling podcast startup called Odeo. Odeo was Evan Williams' baby. Ev had already sold Blogger to Google. He had money, credibility. A small team of misfits crowded into a loft on South Park in San Francisco, trying to figure out what came after podcasts. One of those misfits was a soft-spoken, slightly awkward programmer named Jack Dorsey. Another was a fast-talking, endlessly enthusiastic guy named Noah Glass. If Jack was quiet intensity, Noah was pure energy. He'd bounce through the office barefoot, dreaming out loud. He'd started the original Odeo idea. He believed in community, connection, voice, and he believed in Jack. Late one night, Jack walked over to Noah's apartment with an idea he'd been obsessed with since he was a teenager in St. Louis. He'd always loved dispatch systems, those scrolling status boards used by taxis, ambulances, bike messengers, little snippets of location and activity, constantly updating. "What if," Jack said, "we built something like that, but for people? An online status stream, short messages, what you're doing, where you are, sent from your phone, shared with your friends." Noah loved it instantly. Here was the thing that made Odeo feel alive again. Podcasts were stalling. Apple's iTunes had just crushed their entire business. This weird little status tool? It felt new, fast, human. Together, they pitched it inside Odeo. They hacked together a prototype. They called it Twitter, half as a joke, half because the domain twitter.com was taken. Jack wrote the first line of code. Noah was the one convincing everyone to try it. He pushed people to post their first updates. He suggested using your phone. He talked about how it could change communication. Jack sent the first public message on March 21st, 2006. "Just setting up my Twitter." But inside the company, Noah was the one saying, "This is it. This is the future." Odeo's little experiment started to spread. Employees began using it to coordinate lunch, meetups, jokes. The timeline filled with in-jokes and mundane life updates. It sounds trivial now. Back then, it felt like watching a new social language form in real time. Then came South by Southwest 2007. Odeo had set up flat-screen monitors in the conference hallways. Live Twitter feeds, constantly updating as people at the festival posted. "I'm at this panel. Party at this bar. Who's going to this show?" Suddenly, everyone's phone was buzzing. The monitors became a kind of digital campfire. People realized they could see, in real time, what thousands of strangers were thinking and doing across an entire city. During that week, usage tripled. The service that was supposed to be a side project had just swallowed the company. Here's the twist. Legally, on paper, Odeo owned the code. The investors owned the company. But emotionally, the soul of this new thing belonged to Jack and Noah. Ev Williams saw two problems. 1. Odio's podcast business was dead. 2. This new product might be the lifeboat. So he quietly structured a deal. Ev and a small group offered to buy Odio back from its investors, at a price that assumed the company was basically worthless. Most investors, burned by the podcast flameout, took the deal. Inside that buyout was Twitter, the service that would become Twitter. Here's where the betrayal begins to crystallize. When Ev spun Twitter out into a new company, Twitter Inc., he had to decide who would be recognized as a founder, who would be on the cap table, who would be written into history. Jack was in, Ev was in, Biz Stone was in, Noah Glass was out. Around this same moment, Noah was unraveling. He'd poured himself into Twitter. He believed it was his second chance, maybe his only chance, after years of chasing startup dreams. He'd named it. He'd rallied the team. He thought he was building his legacy with friends. Instead, he was called into a meeting and effectively told he was done. His equity would be bought out. His name deleted from the website. His access cut off. Jack was there, not yelling, not leading the charge, just not stopping it. Years later, in rare interviews, Noah would talk about walking home in a fog, devastated, checking his phone, seeing the product he loved exploding in popularity, while he, the guy who'd helped give it life, was now a ghost. Inside Twitter, a new story solidified. Jack as visionary founder and first CEO, Ev as the steady adult, Biz as the charming communicator. That's the trio you've heard 1,000 times. The man who'd pushed the idea, named the product, and carried it through its most fragile days, erased. That decision, the quiet rewriting of Twitter's origin, did more than just hurt one person. It set the tone. From day one, the company that preached transparency and conversation was born from a backroom deal and a buried betrayal. And somewhere inside Jack Dorsey, the kid who'd always wanted to build beautiful systems, a truth started to settle in. To win in Silicon Valley, it wasn't enough to have an idea. You had to be willing to let people disappear. By the summer of 2007, Twitter was no longer a weird side project. It was a phenomenon. Servers were melting under the load. The fail whale, Twitter's infamous error graphic, was appearing so often it became a meme. Investors were finally paying attention. So were the press. And at the center of it all was Jack. He was just 30 years old, quiet, angular, almost monk-like compared to the swaggering founders that defined that era. But he had something rare, a story. Reporters loved him. The teenage dispatch nerd from St. Louis who'd turned his obsession with status updates into a global conversation stream. The shy kid who suddenly found himself on stage with Al Gore at conferences, talking about the pulse of the planet. Inside the tiny office, though, a very different picture was forming. Twitter was constantly crashing. There was no real business model. The company was burning cash, and the people tasked with fixing all that couldn't always find their CEO. Jack would leave early, a lot. Not to go schmooze investors, not to grind through product roadmaps. He'd slip out to attend yoga classes, or to explore his new fascination with high-end fashion. He became obsessed with the idea of being a designer. He signed up for pattern-making classes. He hung around with artists. He talked about tailoring, silhouette, texture. From Jack's perspective, this made perfect sense. He didn't see himself as a tech bro. He saw himself as an artist. Someone designing systems the way others designed clothes. We all fall down at some point. The question is, Will you get back up? To him, stepping away from the chaos to study form and beauty wasn't a distraction. It was the point. To the board, it looked like negligence. One investor would later describe Jack as having founder's disease. Too much romance, not enough execution. Meetings would be scheduled only for Jack to wander in late or not at all. Engineers begged for decisions on infrastructure, hiring, core architecture. Jack wanted to talk about elegance, about trimming features, about keeping Twitter as simple and pure as possible. There's a brutal irony here. The constraint that made Twitter magical, the 140-character limit, the rawness, came from Jack's artistic temperament. His refusal to bloat the product helped it stand out in a world of cluttered, over-engineered web apps. The same temperament made him blind to what a fragile company actually needed. Ev Williams watched all of this with growing frustration. Ev had been the young, idealistic founder once. He'd blown up, learned hard lessons, and come back more cautious. Now he saw Twitter heading for the same wall. He started hearing the same complaints from every direction. Ops saying they couldn't keep the site alive, product leaders saying there was no roadmap, managers saying Jack was more interested in press than payroll. Whether that was fully fair or not, it became the narrative. And in startups, narratives become decisions. One afternoon in 2008, Jack walked into a board meeting thinking they'd be discussing Twitter's next phase. Instead, they told him he was done. Officially, the line was that Twitter needed a more experienced CEO, someone operational, someone who would show up to every meeting, someone who could turn a chaotic rocket ship into a real company. Unofficially, people whispered a simpler version. He got fired for leaving early to go to fashion class. He was demoted to chairman, a title with prestige but almost no power. Ev stepped in as CEO. The kid who'd written the first line of Twitter's code was now, effectively, sidelined from the thing he dreamed about since he was 14. For Jack, it was a humiliation so sharp it left a scar. Friends say he barely talked about it. He just vanished into the background. He'd still come into the office, but now he was a ghost. The reporters stopped calling. The board stopped asking his opinion. From the outside, it looked like a standard Silicon Valley shuffle. Founder out, adult in. Happens all the time. Inside Jack's head, something else was happening. The boy who'd once watched dispatch boards in awe had just watched his own creation carried away on someone else's stretcher. The betrayal of Noah Glass had shown him that ideas alone don't protect you. Now he'd learned the second lesson. If you're not indispensable, you're disposable. And Jack Dorsey was never going to let that happen to him again. Jack's revenge didn't look like anger. It looked like discipline. After being pushed out of Twitter, he threw himself into a new idea with a kind of cold focus people around him hadn't seen before. This one wasn't about status updates or the global conversation. It was about something quieter and, in some ways, more radical. A tiny white square that let anyone, anywhere, accept a credit card. Square started in 2009 because Jack's friend, glassblower Jim McKelvey, had lost a sale. A customer had tried to pay with a card. Jim couldn't take it. He watched thousands of dollars walk out the door. Jack saw the same pattern he'd seen in dispatch boards, a messy system crying out for simplicity. Payments were locked behind banks, hardware terminals, merchant accounts, layers of gatekeepers. He wanted to flatten it. Square would turn an iPhone into a cash register, plug in the reader, swipe, done. This time, he wasn't the distracted artist playing at being a CEO. He was determined to prove he could build a real business. Square raised money, hired operators, pushed into hardware and software at the same time. He showed up to meetings. He obsessed over risk models. He dove deep into the unglamorous world of chargebacks and fraud. Investors noticed. So did Twitter's board. By 2015, Twitter was in trouble again. User growth had stalled. The company was losing its cultural shine. Internally, morale was low. Externally, Wall Street was circling. Jack had gone from the kid they'd fired to the founder running one of the hottest private companies in Silicon Valley. Square was headed for an IPO. Reporters were calling him visionary again. So when Twitter's then CEO, Dick Costolo, resigned, the board did something that would have seemed insane a few years earlier. They asked Jack to come back. Here's where the story turns from simple redemption into something that almost breaks belief. Because Jack didn't just agree to return as CEO. He agreed to do it while staying CEO of Square. 2 companies, 2 boards, 2 cultures, 1 man. Officially, the line was that he'd split his time. Mornings at one company, afternoons at the other. Unofficially, he tried to be everywhere all at once. He'd wake up before dawn, meditate, then walk miles to the office, taking calls on the way. Mornings buried in Twitter's problems, harassment, abuse, growth, politics. Afternoons buried in Square's, regulators, banks, merchants, risk. Nights with investors, press, or alone in his apartment, staring at dashboards. On paper, it looked impossible. In Jack's head, it started to sound almost spiritual. If he could optimize himself hard enough, maybe he could bend the limits. That's when his personal life began to look less like wellness and more like an experiment. He switched to eating 1 meal a day, just dinner, no breakfast, no lunch. On some weekends, he wouldn't eat at all. 2-day fasts became 3-day fasts. He talked about how clear it made him feel, how sharp, how in control. He started doing intense sauna sessions followed by ice baths. 50 minutes in, 10 minutes out, repeated 3 times. He loved the stress, the shock, the feeling of pushing through pain on purpose. He meditated for hours. He sat 10-day silent, Vipassana retreats, where you wake at 4 a.m., don't speak, don't look people in the eyes, and spend your days watching your breath and your thoughts. He brought that same ascetic energy back to the office, walking 5 miles to work, timing his day in blocks, tracking everything. From the outside, it made him look eccentric. From the inside, it was survival. Twitter was no longer a quirky messaging startup. By the mid-2010s, it was a geopolitical weapon. Heads of state were using it to threaten war. Extremist groups were using it to recruit. Troll armies were using it to harass journalists and activists into silence. At the same time, Square was becoming a lifeline for small businesses and individuals shut out of the banking system. The stakes there weren't abstract either. A glitch could mean a food truck owner not making rent, a hairdresser not getting paid. Jack's days were spent jumping between 2 forms of power, speech and money. Who gets to talk? Who gets to get paid? Then, in late 2018, he posted a series of photos from a meditation retreat in Myanmar. Sunsets, temples, smiling selfies. He raved about the beauty of the country, the calm, the silence. He didn't mention the UN investigation into genocide against the Rohingya or the fact that Facebook, and to a lesser extent Twitter, had been used to spread hate speech that fueled the violence. The backlash was swift. People called him tone-deaf, privileged, A billionaire dropping into a country still traumatized by ethnic cleansing and posting like a tourist. For critics, it crystallized something they'd felt for a while. Jack Dorsey was in charge of platforms that touched the rawest nerves of global politics, and yet he seemed to live in a world of ice baths, meditation cushions, and abstract talk about healthy conversations. But underneath the missteps, there was something more human going on. He'd taken on two impossible jobs at once. He was trying to carry the weight of two empires by hacking his own body and mind into a machine. The fasting, the walking, the silence weren't just quirks. They were armor. Because deep down, Jack was starting to realize a terrifying truth. The more he optimized himself, the less control he seemed to have over the thing that really mattered. Twitter wasn't just a product anymore. It was a monster, and it was learning to move on its own. The turning point didn't look like a turning point. It looked like a night of jokes. In 2015 and early 2016, political Twitter felt entertaining. Candidates roasting each other, memes flying, a strange, chaotic election, but still a spectacle. Jack watched it partly as a citizen, partly as the guy who'd helped build the stage. From the outside, Twitter was thriving. Politicians needed it. Journalists lived on it. Movements organized through it. Inside the company, the mood was very different. Teams were drowning in reports of harassment, doxing, coordinated pile-ons. The features Jack once saw as elegant, retweets, quote tweets, trending topics, were being used like artillery. You could point millions of strangers at a single person with one angry post. Jack started asking a question he'd mostly avoided for years. When someone opens Twitter, what are we actually telling them to do? They weren't explicit instructions, but the design sent a message. Big numbers next to your follower count. Big numbers on likes, retweets, quote tweets. A timeline that rewarded speed and outrage. No friction between your raw impulse and a global megaphone. The incentives were clear. Don't be thoughtful. Be loud. Then came the 2016 US election. In the months leading up to it, Twitter's influence went from cultural to nuclear. Rumors, conspiracy theories, doctored images, many of them seeded by state-linked troll farms, spread faster than any fact-check could catch them. Fake accounts coordinated hashtags to push stories into trending. Real users, outraged or amused, amplified them even further. From inside Twitter's war room, employees could actually see it happening. They could map swarms of newly created accounts hitting the same target. Watchbots latch on to divisive issues and pour gasoline on every spark. Jack went on Joe Rogan's podcast a couple years later and tried to explain the realization. Twitter wasn't just a town square. It was a square wired with speakers and mirrors and hidden tunnels, where some people could whisper and be heard like they were shouting. The technology had changed the velocity of speech, and velocity changes everything. When Donald Trump won, a lot of people blamed Facebook for fake news. But the tone, the rhythm, the feeling of that campaign, that lived on Twitter. And the man who used it better than anyone was the new president of the United States. Trump tweeted insults at journalists, corporations, allies, enemies. He announced policy. He threatened war. He picked fights at 3 a.m. Cable news built entire segments around whatever he'd posted an hour earlier. Other world leaders began using Twitter differently too. Less as a broadcast tool, more as a weapon or a shield. Jack's nightmare scenario was suddenly real. He'd built something that let you see, in real time, what powerful people actually thought. That had always been the dream. Transparency, directness. no gatekeepers. But now those same people were using it to intimidate, distract, mislead, and to summon mobs on demand. Every choice Twitter made about those tweets instantly became political. If they took them down, they were censoring a president. If they left them up, they were platforming hate. Jack tried to draw a line. He told his team, "We don't police ideas, we police conduct. Threats, doxing, coordinated harassment, terrorist recruitment." But real life never fits cleanly into policy documents. ISIS propaganda accounts were easy to justify banning, neo-Nazi networks too. Then came the grayer cases. What do you do when a comedian tweets, "I'm going to kill you," at their best friend, and the algorithm flags it as a death threat? What about when an anonymous user posts a video of a teenager in a red political hat and a Native American elder facing off? And within hours, celebrities are demanding the kid's name and address. Jack started to see how often Twitter itself was part of the problem. The dog piles, the instant judgment, the lack of context, those weren't glitches. They were emergent properties of the system he'd helped design. He and his team added tools, better blocking and muting, labels on manipulated media, warnings on some misleading posts. They tried to slow things down without killing the conversations that made Twitter addictive. But there was one account that made every conversation inside the company feel like tiptoeing around a landmine. Some employees wanted him gone. They pointed to policies on abuse, incitement, targeted harassment. Outside activists argued that if any normal user tweeted what he did, they'd be suspended. Jack kept coming back to one idea: public interest. If the platform was a record of what powerful people said, did the world have a right to see even the worst of it? He decided yes, up to a point. So Twitter left Trump's account up, but began adding small acts of resistance. Fact-check labels. Warnings that a tweet glorified violence. Interstitial screens users had to tap through. Each one triggered a political firestorm. Congressional hearings. Accusations of bias. Trump supporters calling Twitter a leftist censorship machine. Trump critics calling it complicit. Then, on January 6, 2021, something Jack had always treated as a hypothetical finally crossed into reality. As rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, organized in part on fringe platforms but broadcasting proudly on Twitter, the company's safety team watched in horror. The president was tweeting not just to millions of followers, but to people already smashing windows and beating police officers a few miles from Twitter's San Francisco office. The question was no longer academic. If someone dies because a leader used your platform to inflame a crowd, are you responsible? After years of resisting the nuclear option, Twitter hit the button. They permanently banned the sitting president of the United States. Jack knew exactly what he was doing. On one level, it was a safety decision. They believed his continued presence posed a risk of further incitement of violence. On another level, it was something far darker. With a few clicks, a small group of people in San Francisco had removed the primary communication channel of the most powerful elected official in the world. In a blog post days later, Jack tried to straddle the contradiction. He said it was the right decision and that it set a dangerous precedent. He'd spent years trying to make Twitter feel less like a throne and more like a tool. But in that moment, he realized what he'd become in the eyes of half the planet. Not a product designer, not a CEO, an unelected speech arbiter, the accidental dictator of the digital public square. After January 6th, something in Jack snapped. He'd crossed the line he'd spent years trying to avoid. He'd pulled the plug on a president. He'd felt, in his own words, how a company making a business decision had become a planetary event. And he hated it. He'd always believed in the early ideals of the internet: decentralization, open protocols, systems that didn't care who you were, only whether you played by the rules of the code. Twitter had become the opposite: centralized, personal. Every decision felt like it passed through his own nervous system. So he started looking for a way out. Not just a way out of the job, a way out of that entire model of power. He found it in a white paper written by someone who might not even exist. Bitcoin had been around since 2009. For years, it was mostly a curiosity. Cypherpunks, libertarians, a handful of speculators. Jack had watched it from a distance. By 2017, he wasn't watching anymore. He was obsessed. He called Bitcoin the internet's native currency. A protocol, not a company. A system that no board, no government, no CEO could unilaterally shut down or censor. To most people, it looked like a risky asset. To Jack, it looked like absolution. At Square, he pushed the company deeper into it. First, they let users buy and sell Bitcoin in Cash App. Then they started holding it on the corporate balance sheet. Later, they built hardware wallets, mining initiatives, developer funds. In 2021, he did something symbolic. He renamed the entire company. Square became Block, a nod to blockchain, to the idea that the company wasn't just a payment startup anymore. It was part of a movement to rebuild the financial system on open rails. At conferences, Jack sounded less like a CEO and more like a monk preaching about protocol. He said if he wasn't working at Twitter or Block, he'd be working full-time on Bitcoin. He donated millions to developers working on it. He backed decentralized social protocols like Nostr. It was hard not to see what was driving him. Twitter had taught Jack what it felt like to sit at the center of a control panel that could shape elections, wars, markets. Bitcoin was the opposite. You can build on it. You can support it. You can evangelize it. But you can't sit in a corner office and decide whose transaction goes through and whose doesn't. In public, he framed it as evolution, the next chapter, moving from speech to money, from centralized platforms to decentralized protocols. In private, people around him saw something else: exhaustion. He was still running 2 companies, still haunting congressional hearings, still answering for every content decision made by a trust and safety team he insisted should have more autonomy. On Lex Fridman's podcast, recorded just before the pandemic, he talked about his own mortality, about wanting to work only on things that would matter for all humans, all humanity. The more he said that, the smaller Twitter seemed in his mind. It wasn't that it didn't matter. It was that it mattered in a way he no longer believed he was qualified to handle. At the same time, he was quietly funding something that looked, from the outside, like an attempt to fix his original mistake: Blue Sky. Instead of being Twitter 2, Blue Sky was supposed to be a protocol, a decentralized standard any app could plug into. Posts would live on the network, not inside one company's database. Algorithms would be swappable. Users could carry their identity between services. If Twitter had made him an accidental dictator, Blue Sky was his fantasy of abdication, a world where no single CEO could ban a president, or delete a movement, or rewrite an origin story with a cap table. But there was still one problem. As long as he was running Twitter, he was the bottleneck he claimed to hate. So in November 2021, he typed out that strangely calm resignation tweet. He said the company was ready to move on from its founders. He elevated Parag Agrawal, a quiet engineer, to CEO. He told employees he wanted Twitter to be able to stand on its own without him. From the outside, it looked like a clean break. From the inside, it felt more like a man backing slowly away from a creature he'd raised and no longer trusted. He shifted his public energy almost entirely to block and Bitcoin. He posted less about healthy conversation, more about open financial rails, universal basic income, privacy. But the monster he'd helped create didn't vanish when he walked out of the building. It stayed exactly where it had always been, in the timelines of hundreds of millions of people, waiting to see who would sit in his chair next, and what they'd decide to do with it. When Jack walked away in 2021, he didn't completely let go. He still owned roughly 2.4% of Twitter. He still sat on the board. He still cared, maybe more than he wanted to admit, about what happened to the blue bird that had once been his entire identity. And he had one more belief he clung to. If centralized platforms were here to stay, maybe all they needed was the right dictator. In early 2022, that dictator showed up in his mentions. Elon Musk had always been a power user. He loved Twitter's chaos. He used it to move markets, dunk on critics, and turn himself into a meme factory. But behind the jokes, he'd been complaining for years that the platform was biased, censorious, and dumbly run. Then he started buying shares. Quietly at first, then loudly. Within weeks, Elon had become Twitter's largest individual shareholder. He accepted, then rejected, a board seat. He flirted with building his own competitor. He tweeted a poll asking if Twitter rigorously adhered to free speech, and when millions of people voted no, he said the consequences of that poll would be important. Then he made his move, an offer to buy Twitter outright. $44 billion, cash. Inside the company, people panicked. Employees who'd spent years trying to hold the line on harassment, disinformation, and election interference now watched the world's most impulsive user offer to buy the site like it was a used car. Jack's reaction surprised almost everyone. He backed him, publicly. He tweeted that, "Elon is the singular solution I trust." He said that taking Twitter back private was the right path, and that Elon's goal of creating a maximally trusted and broadly inclusive public square was the right one. To critics, it looked like madness. How could the guy who'd agonized over deplatforming a president cheer on someone who'd already mocked Twitter's safety rules in front of 80 million followers? But if you listen to Jack, a different logic appears. He didn't think Twitter should be a traditional company at all. He thought it should be a protocol, like email or Bitcoin. In his mind, there were only two ways to get there. Either you gradually decentralize from within, or you hand the keys to someone willing to blow up the old structure and start over. Jack no longer believed he could be that person. He was too associated with the previous regime, too scarred by years of compromises. Elon wasn't. So when the board hesitated, worried about price, fiduciary duty, regulatory risk, Jack nudged them. Hard. He reminded them of their obligation to shareholders. He praised Elon's intentions in private conversations. He helped smooth egos, decode tech bro language, make the deal feel less insane. When the sale finally closed in October 2022, Jack did something even more telling. He rolled his shares into the new private company. Most board members cashed out. Jack effectively said, "I'm staying on this ride, but as a passenger, not a driver." What followed didn't look like the careful transition he'd probably imagined. Within days, Elon fired the CEO Jack had chosen, the policy chief he'd defended, and a huge chunk of the staff who'd spent years building the very safety systems Jack used to agonize over. Verification was turned into a paid badge, then briefly weaponized by impersonators. Journalists were suspended and unsuspended in chaotic waves. Previously banned accounts, neo-Nazis, conspiracists, even Trump himself, were reinstated en masse. Advertisers fled. Researchers tracked spikes in hate speech. Fact-checking teams were gutted. Content moderation was rebranded as freedom. Jack watched all this from the outside. He posted occasionally, sometimes defending Elon's right to run things his way, sometimes gently suggesting different directions. But he never launched a full-throated attack. When asked what he thought of the chaos, he mostly blamed himself. He said Twitter's problems went deeper than any one owner, that the real mistake had been making it a company in the first place, instead of a protocol. To many of the employees who'd once seen him as a principled, if conflicted leader, that answer landed like a gut punch. They'd bled to keep the platform usable, safe, and alive. They'd believed Jack shared their values, even when he couldn't always live up to them. Now it looked like he'd handed their work to the one person almost guaranteed to tear it apart in public. From one angle, it was the final act of a founder trying to free his creation from Wall Street's grip. From another, it was the ultimate betrayal. The man who'd spent a decade wrestling with the responsibility of moderating speech had sold his monster to someone who saw that responsibility as a joke. So where does that leave Jack Dorsey now? The man who helped build Twitter, lost it, saved it, fled it, and then watched it get torn apart. Today, he looks less like a tech CEO and more like an ascetic philosopher who accidentally wandered into capitalism. He spends most of his time at Block talking about Bitcoin, open protocols, and something he calls economic empowerment. He funds decentralized projects. He backs developers working on Nostr, on blue sky-style protocols, on tools that, at least in theory, can't be captured by one company or one government. He still disappears on long meditation retreats. 10 days of silence. No phone. No Twitter. He talks openly about death, about wanting to work only on things that will matter for decades, not quarters. To some people, this looks like growth. A guy who stared down the ugliness of centralized social media and decided to spend the rest of his life building alternatives. A billionaire trying, in his own strange way, to atone. To others, it looks like escape. When things at Twitter got truly impossible, when every decision risked riots or coups or congressional hearings, he didn't stay and fight. He walked. Then he handed the keys to the one driver guaranteed to hit the accelerator. Even his Bitcoin obsession has two faces. On one side, it's consistent with the kid from Missouri who fell in love with the open internet. A neutral protocol for value, just like HTTP is a neutral protocol for information. No central bank. No Jack Dorsey deciding whose payment clears. On the other, it neatly removes him from the kind of messy, human judgment that broke him at Twitter. There are no content moderation meetings on a blockchain. No teary appeals from users whose posts got taken down. Just code. Ask 10 people what Jack Dorsey really wants, and you'll get 10 different answers. Some will say he wants to disappear into his own head, to meditate, fast, and tinker on protocols until the day he dies. Some will say he still wants what every founder wants, a legacy, not as the guy who banned Trump, or the guy who sold Twitter to Musk, but as the one who pushed the world toward decentralized money and speech. And some will say he's chasing something simpler and darker. An answer to the question that's haunted him since the first time he watched Twitter melt down in his hands. Was I the one who broke the world? Or was the world already broken, and my platforms just made it visible? He'll probably never get a clean answer. Neither will we. But there's one thing we can say for sure. Jack Dorsey is no longer the kid quietly writing code at a kitchen table. We all fall down at some point. The question is, will you get back up? He's a man who has seen exactly how much damage a simple idea can do when you wire it into billions of lives. And he is, very clearly, trying to live with that. Jack walked away. Elon rebranded it. Boards changed, logos changed, CEOs changed, but the deeper thing didn't. Twitter, X, still lives inside our reflex to post first and think later, to dunk instead of understand, to turn every disagreement into a war. Jack Dorsey helped build the machine that makes that reflex feel normal. Whether that makes him a villain, a victim, or a visionary, that judgment is ours, not his. If you want to see how another simple idea spiraled into something no one could control, watch this next story.